All right, I welcome you once again to our second session of macroeconomics. Let me start by asking those with unmuted microphones, please mute yourselves in the event that it unmutes accidentally. All right, so my name is Fortune, and we are going to continue with the journey we started last week of macroeconomics. So in the previous week, we introduced macroeconomics. We talked about the differences between microeconomics, which we looked at in the previous semester, with the current macroeconomics that we are looking at during this current semester. We also looked at the various measures that price stability, your balance of payment stability, as well as your equitable distribution of income and wealth. And as we're mentioning, or as we're delving deep within each of these key performance indicators, we highlighted each proxy or each measurement element that is used to identify or to assess the extent of the economic activity in relation to each performance indicator. For instance, when we're looking at economic growth, we stated that economic growth is mainly measured using a key economic indicator referred to as gross domestic product. So gross domestic product within itself comes in many variations. We have what we refer to as nominal gross domestic product, and there is what we refer to as real gross domestic product. We will delve much more deep into that in the coming sessions. And we stated that it is used to measure whether there is growth within an economy, and gross domestic product itself is a measure of the production that is taking place within a particular nation. So the value of the goods and services that are produced within a particular nation combined together are referred to as gross domestic product. We also looked at how gross domestic product within itself is measured, where we looked at the income approach, the expenditure approach, as well as the value addition approach within that spectrum. So the importance of economic growth is that it links to each and every economic indicator that we have. It links to full employment, because if there's no economic growth within a particular nation, you would find out that employment also suffers, unemployment increases because the economy is not growing enough to absorb all of the resources that are available. So therefore, you'd be having excess capacity, which would be reflected in elements such as unemployment. So full employment is the second economic indicator. So full employment is mainly its main emphasis is on the utilization of resources, mainly on labor resources, where we looked at the different types of, where we're going to be looking at the different types of unemployment. I think that is your unit 5 or somewhere there in your study guide, and how we should be approaching each of these. So the influences of these unemployment upon an economy is well documented, and the major challenges come along with it: decreased standards of living, as well as a reduction in incomes within a particular nation. Then we have elements relating to price stability as well. So with price stability, it becomes imperatively important to have an economy where prices are stable, because if you do not have prices that are stable, it means that long-term planning becomes difficult. If you recall some of the questions that we looked at within the closing segments of the previous session, where we looked at a question which was talking about long-term planning and how it influences long-term planning within our price stability influences long-term planning within a particular economy. So hence, as a result, that becomes important, because if there's no long-term planning, it means investments are going to be affected within that particular nation. Elements relating to savings are going to be affected again as well within that particular economy. Let me just mute those with unmuted microphones. All right. So it means that elements relating to long-term planning within that particular economy becomes affected as a result of that. You cannot plan beyond today. You cannot save because you're scared that the moment that you're going to keep your money in form of cash, it's going to lose its value overnight or over time. And hence, as a result, that is going to be affecting our long-term planning. So in terms of price stability, it's going to be what we're going to be focusing on today, as we'll be talking about the subject of inflation, and we'll be delving deep into the different types of inflation that you find within an economy, as well as some of the effects that you find as a result of that. So that becomes imperatively important for an economy to have prices that are stable. So when you're talking about price stability, you're not only talking about prices minimizing the rising prices only. We also talk about also minimizing a significant decrease in prices. So they're supposed to be operating within an optimum level. So we do not want prices to decrease. Recall in your microeconomics, when you're talking about some of the factors that affect supply, where you had your supply curve being an upward sloping graph from left to right, indicating the effect that prices have on the economy. So the upward sloping graph indicates that as prices are increasing, you'd also have an increase in productivity as well. So they're supposed to be increasing within a certain threshold, which is usually given by the South African Reserve Bank as a target inflation, usually between 3 to 6%, and it shouldn't exceed that. So whenever you have inflation exceeding that, then that becomes a problem of inflation within that particular economy, and hence, as a result, affecting other variables as well. And also beyond and above that, we have the balance of payment stability, which is also a key performance indicator that is used to measure the performance of an economy. So the balance of payments indicator is used to measure the trade that is taking place between the local economy and the external economy, as well as how then that affects gross domestic product within a particular nation. So the balance of payments is also important because it tracks the competitiveness of an economy with the rest of the world. So we understand that all of the economies that we operate in a global economy. There's been globalization, especially with the internet age, connectivity of trade routes and things like that created a globalization effect on the economy. So you'd find out that as a result of that, you would then have increased access to external markets, and as well as external economies also have an access within the local economy as well as a result of that. So that trade that takes place from a factor endowment perspective, where you'd want to access certain factors of production that are available within a particular economy, whether it's labor or whether it's natural resources, whether it's steel, gold, diamonds, rare earth minerals, you name it, and all of those products. So hence, as a result of that, you'd find out that trade would become necessitated. So as a result of that, you'd find out that there is need to also approach it with a balanced perspective, where you'd also need to assess whether you are exporting in as much as you are importing. So you'd want to maintain a balance and to avoid large current account deficit. We're going to be delving much more deep into the balance of payments, international trade, I think on Unit 9 somewhere there, where we're looking at the foreign sector and how it affects the local economy as well. So this becomes imperatively important, especially in today's world scenarios where you have your United States imposing tariffs against the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is shivering because of Trump tariffs. So that comes as a result of the understanding that it's important to trade, it's important to have access to external markets, it's important to have access to free trade and free movement of goods and services across the globe, because that also necessitates or supports other economies. For instance, some economies that are export-led, like your China, that depend on external markets for their growth, that do not grow inwardly. And as a result, when another country imposes a tariff on its particular products, you find out that it affects a whole lot of elements within that particular economy. So the balance is also important in also ensuring that your economy does not entirely rely on the external economy as well, but also is self-sufficient in the event of things like trade tariffs, etc., and things like that. So that becomes also important within that particular aspect. Then also one of the important indicators of the performance of an economy over and beyond how much production is taking place, how much price stability is there, is the issue of distribution of income and wealth within a particular nation. So distribution of income and wealth is also imperatively important within a particular nation because it affects how citizens or how individuals that are living within the particular jurisdiction are finding it easy to access the economic benefits that are accruing as a result of the growth that is taking place. So if an economy is growing very, very fast, or when an economy is growing at a larger pace than the growth in the distribution of income, there is a problem there because it's likely going to create issues between the haves and the have-nots, and all of the issues that come as a result of that, crime and instability that usually occurs as a result of that. And we've also highlighted how South Africa fares in terms of this. And South Africa, according to world standards, ranks the worst when it comes to distribution of income and wealth due to a wide variety of factors that needs to be addressed in different ways, etc. So hence, as a result of that, fair allocation of income and wealth across the societies becomes imperatively important in order to look at whether the citizens are benefiting from the growth that is taking place. Is the growth inclusive or not with the rest of the economy? So that becomes imperatively important. So I was looking at some of the key metrics that also comes along with equitable distribution of income and wealth. And some of the countries, for instance, in South Africa, I think the GDP per capita, which is usually used to measure the general distribution without looking at the actual distribution of wealth, is around at 6,000 United States dollars. And with countries like Nigeria, it's around 2,000 United States dollars. Countries like Zimbabwe as well, around 2,000 United States dollars, indicating diversities in terms of the per capita distribution. So the per capita distribution is not really an indicator of the distribution of income itself, but it just generally highlights how the growth is taking place, or how GDP is divided amongst the population if we have equitable distribution within a particular nation. So when you look at some of these metrics, they highlight whether an economy has grown sufficiently enough to accommodate everyone who is within that particular nation, looking at the population growth and things like that. So comparing population growth with the growth in the gross domestic product, as well as how then the wealth is distributed across the population elements. So this becomes imperatively important. This is what we're looking at in the previous session. So today we just want to narrow in or zoom in on price stability, where we'll be talking about your unit chapter 6, which talks about inflation. So we talked about the importance of price stability and its importance within a particular economy, how it affects long-term planning, etc. So what then becomes important when you look at inflation is to understand the definition of inflation itself. What is inflation? So you find out that when it comes to the definition of inflation, there's also a wide variety of definitions in terms of how you can look at inflation. But in general, inflation is defined as a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services within an economy. So a sustained increase in the general price level is a key highlight of what is happening within that particular economy. So we're not looking at spikes that happen maybe during some certain elements within a particular financial economy or financial year. And then as a result, that creates, let me just check the chat. Yes, I said unit 6. Let me check if it is unit 6, just for confirmation's sake. It's for inflation. So with the study guides that you have, probably, yes, it's unit 6 from the study guide that I have here. So probably you might be having a different version of the study guide. You might find it within either a chapter later or a chapter before. So it's unit 6, a unit before or a unit after. All right, so with inflation, it is a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services. We want to assess how inflation takes place, as well as what is it that we're defining as inflation within a given set of circumstances. So when you look at inflation, it is referred to as a sustained increase in the general price level. So the general price level is an indicator of what we are referring to as inflation. And we need to understand how we come up with what we refer to as a general price level using what we refer to as the consumer price index, or the CPI. So we're now looking at the how inflation is measured. So inflation is measured using a key performance indicator that is referred to as the consumer price index. That is the key metric that we follow when we want to assess, just like when we're looking at economic growth, we're looking at gross domestic product. With inflation, we look at the consumer price index. So these key statistics, you usually find it within elements like States SA, your South African Reserve Bank, which from time to time publicize these key statistics, highlighting or tracking what they refer to as a consumer basket of goods and services, which we're not going to be looking at for the purposes of this module, but just a background understanding of it is also important. So this representative basket of goods and services is a selection of goods and services that are just generally selected to be of prime importance to an average South African household. So for instance, they can look at the price of data, they can track the price of fuel, they can track the price of bread, they can take rental prices, etc. So they combine all of these particular products and they give them various weightings in terms of their importance to this particular household. So when they've allocated the weights, they then use those weights to calculate the CPI for that particular year. And when the CPI is calculated, it is then used to calculate what we refer to as inflation rate. So inflation rate is given as the current year's CPI minus the previous year's CPI divided by the previous year's CPI times 100. So this is where macroeconomics starts, where we calculate the inflation rate. We are not interested in the consumer price index, how it is calculated, etc. We're interested in the calculation of inflation rate. So when you hear that the inflation rate is at 6%, they would have made this particular calculation and come up with a 6% increase in the prices. So when you're saying there's a 6% increase in the prices, we're not referring to one particular product, but we are referring to the general price level, which is the increase in the basket of goods and services that have been selected within a particular economy. All right, so we're not looking at only, or probably the price of fuel only, or the price of bread only, but you're looking at the increase in the prices of these consumer basket of goods and services. So over the years, we have a graph here that is showing how South Africa was faring over the years in terms of inflation from the year 2018 to 2023, where we see a decline, a slight decline from 2010 to 2020, and it grows exceedingly from 2020 going to 2022, obviously as a result of reasons. So that becomes important for us to analyze the causes of inflation. What is it that causes inflation to take place within a particular economy, and as well as looking at some of the issues surrounding it. So we're going to be looking at the types of inflation. So there are various types of inflation that you can get within a particular economy. But to zoom in to two distinct categories of inflation, you can have your creeping inflation, you can have your working inflation, depending with the pace at which it is growing. You can have what is referred to as galloping inflation, hyperinflation, etc. But all of these definitions, they can be narrowed down to two main causes, that is your demand pull and your cost push inflation. So when we'll be looking at some of the factors that, or the approaches that are used to approach inflation, you understand why we are narrowing down to demand pull and cost push inflation. So with demand pull inflation, we understand that an economy, when it operates on the interaction of supply and demand. So this interaction of the supply and demand plays a key role. From your microeconomics, you understood that whenever there is a interaction between a supply and a demand graph, that is where the quantity is going to be derived from, that is where the price is going to be derived from. That also is true from a macroeconomic perspective, but now we are talking about the aggregated demand, and we're now talking about the aggregated supply. So when you're talking about aggregated demand, we're talking about the demand or the total demand that is available within a particular economy. For instance, any economy's spending elements, that is your consumption spending by households represented by C, investment spending by firms represented by I, government spending represented by a G, as well as the net factor from abroad, which is the difference between your exports and your imports represented by X minus M. So these summation of these elements is what we refer to as aggregate demand. I'm sure you've seen these elements before when we were talking about gross domestic product. We stated that gross domestic product is a summation of these elements as well, and it is the same elements that highlight aggregate demand. And why is it the case that it is the same elements when we say that gross domestic product, you sum your consumption, investment spending, government spending, as well as your net factor from abroad. And that is the same thing that we're having now when we are calculating aggregate demand. Why is it that the way that we are using to calculate aggregate demand is the same way that we are using to calculate gross domestic product? I don't know if anyone would want to unmute themselves and try to give us an answer to that. Why is it that when we defined gross domestic product, we stated that gross domestic product is the summation of C plus I plus G plus X minus M, which are the spending elements from the economic participants within a particular economy. And now we are saying that aggregate demand, which is your total demand within an economy, is also calculated the same. Anyone would want to think about that or to explain to us why is it that aggregate demand and gross domestic product having the same method of calculation? All right, let me just come in there. So remember when we were talking about the approaches that we use to calculate gross domestic product, we mentioned that there are three approaches. There is the income approach, there is the expenditure approach, and there is the value addition approach. So the expenditure approach of gross domestic product, by the word expenditure itself, okay, you want to say something? I see an unmuted microphone. Okay, all right. So from the expenditure approach, we stated that gross domestic product is measured by consumption spending plus your investment spending plus your government spending plus the difference between exports and imports. That is from the expenditure approach. So the word expenditure simply means spending. So the total spending that is taking place within an economy gives us what we refer to as aggregate demand, because it highlights the demand that is available within an economy. So this is important. So the aggregate demand graph also is the same as the demand graph that you had in your microeconomics, which is downward sloping from left to right, indicating that demand also increases as prices are reducing, as you see the quantity here, etc. And also production also increases as the prices of factors of production are reducing. So that is the same. So you'd find out that aggregate demand also follows the same line in relation to an economy. Then we have aggregate supply, which is upward sloping from left to right, indicating an increase in supply as prices are increasing, quantities are increasing as a result of that. which also follows the same law that you learned from the law of supply and your law of demand. But now this is at an aggregated level. It's no longer a particular product, but it is an addition or summation of a total products within an economy. So as a result of that, that is the key function behind aggregate demand. So when you're saying there's demand pull inflation, demand pull inflation occurs when there is a rapid rise in the aggregate demand within an economy, which aggregate supply sometimes cannot effectively administer or effectively adjust itself within that particular vein. So here I would go to the graph that we have within our study guide, which is more, let's go to the aggregate demand pull inflation graph within the study guide here. So you can see here with aggregate demand and with the aggregate supply graph, which is upward sloping, and it's upward sloping up until a certain point where now it becomes perfectly inelastic, where you see this vertical aggregate supply graph here, indicating a no change in quantity even if prices change. So this is where the demand pull effect kicks in. You can see here that at aggregate supply 1, AD1, equilibrium level 1, we have the quantity at Y1. I can see there, I think it's Y1, yeah. Let me try to zoom in. Yeah, it's Y1. Then we have P1. So this indicates that at this particular level, that is the prices that are prevalent within the economy, and this is the quantity that is being produced within that particular economy. But as aggregate demand is increasing, households are increasing their spending, firms are demanding more, the households is the government is also spending, aggregate demand tends to increase within that particular economy. And you'd find out that firms would still have a leeway to adjust as prices are increasing. They're able to also adjust production or the income that is taking place within that particular economy up until a certain point where any further adjustments can no longer take place. That is, your aggregate supply is now perfectly inelastic. That is at your level Y3 here. You can see that no matter the price increase from P3 here to P4 here, it is not causing an increase in output as it was during this particular stage. So this stage is where you have your 3 to 6% taking place, and the South African Reserve Bank is coming in to try to monitor inflation and to see to what extent can they influence the economy in terms of prices. But beyond this 3% now, 3 to 6% threshold, that is where you're now having prices only increasing, and there's no subsequent production increase as a result of that. So now that is where the problem kicks in, because when prices are only increasing and production is not increasing, it means that you're likely going to have issues in relation to competition for the same amount of production that is taking place here. So the goods will become too few, and the demand is now too high. And that is also another definition of inflation, where you have too much money chasing too few goods. I'm sure when you've been reading around this particular subject, or when you're going to be doing so, you come up this phrase which talks about too much money chasing too few goods. That occurs when prices are only increasing, and aggregate demand is increasing, and goods are not adjusting as a result of that. So hence, as a result, you'd find out that there's a price increase that takes place as a result of that, the economy can no longer adjust beyond this particular point. So that is demand pull inflation. So there are many causes that come with demand pull inflation. You have a rapid economic growth. So economic growth is good to a certain extent. However, it comes along with it a cost, where most of the times when the economy is growing, it grows with the growth in prices as well, as we are seeing on the particular graphs that we're looking at, that for any additional output to take place, we also have to accommodate an increase in prices to a certain extent as a result of the increases in aggregate demand that are taking place. So rapid growth in economic growth would also cause inflation to increase. So you understand this one more as we'll be looking at the business cycle, which shows how the long-term economic growth trend takes place over time, highlighting issues relating to, let me check the chat, highlighting issues relating to how did we jump from unit 1 to unit 6? All right. So I'll explain why we moved from unit 1 to unit 6. This is where we haven't started yet. These are just sessions that we're looking at. Remember, in unit 1, we're looking at the macroeconomic objectives. And within the macroeconomic objectives, we talked about the whole of the study guide itself from unit 1 up until the last unit. So that gives us an ample element. So I just picked this particular topic. We are not moving in chronology as yet. So when we start the sessions, that is when we're going to be moving from unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, for those that are going to be joining us. So these are just sessions to highlight the key elements that we are looking at within the particular sessions. So we can just even start talking about unit 2. It's all the same things that we're talking about here. Unit 2 will be talking about the monetary side of the economy. We are still going to be talking about how price stability comes into play. So all of these are interrelated, so no issues relating to that. All right, so there are various causes in relation to demand pull inflation. The first one, or the key one that you find, is the one that you find in relation to increases in rapid economic growth. So in relation to that, when the economy is growing, you'd find out that there is the downside of economic growth. That is, you need to sacrifice a little bit of an increase in prices for output to take place. So that is what you see within these graphs here. When aggregate demand is introduced within an economy, you'd find out that it also results in increases in the price levels. You will understand that more when you'll be looking at the business cycle in, I think, one of the units later on, when we'll be looking at the business cycle, how economic growth trend over time takes place and how a recession occurs from a downtrend to an uptrend, etc. So all of these elements becomes imperatively important when it comes to explaining how inflation takes place over time. So with a rapid increase in economic growth, that is where you have your aggregate demand shifting to the right, and the aggregate supply is also trying to pop up to that. But as we're highlighting within the study guide there, where you have a graph that is now upward sloping, where that is the long-term, we refer to that as the long-term supply curve. So with the long-term supply curve now, it indicates the inability of resources to be flexible. Firms cannot adjust production due to inflexibility of resources. And when aggregate demand is pumping pressure more than the firm's ability to deploy resources, that is where price stability now then kicks in. So that is where economic growth is in the issues relating to inflation. Then we have expansionary and expansionary monetary policy. We're going to be talking about monetary policy when you look at the monetary sector. So expansionary fiscal policy and monetary policy. The fiscal policy is the one that the government enacts. We'll talk about that, I think, on unit 4 when you look at the public sector. So the monetary policy is the one that the South African Reserve Bank enacts. And we'll talk about that when you look at the monetary sector. So these policies are key policies when it comes to managing an economy, whether you would want to control inflation or to control output within a particular economy. You would need to look at these key policies. I'm sure you've heard these terms, fiscal policy, especially when the South African finance minister is introducing his budget. That is where the fiscal policy is highlighted. And the monetary policy is introduced when the South African Reserve Bank, Lesecha, is introducing his monetary policy statements that he does usually on a quarterly basis, first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, then the end of year. So all of these becomes imperatively important because they are a significant indicator of the intention that the government and the central bank have on the economy, or have in terms of addressing the issues that are occurring within an economy. So from an inflationary perspective, you'd find out that when you're looking at a fiscal policy that mainly is from the government perspective, that usually uses tools like your taxation and your government spending, you'd want to look at how the government is spending within an economy. Is the government increasing its spending? And whenever the government is increasing its spending, it's a highlight of an increase in aggregate demand. When the government is reducing its spending, it's a highlight of a decrease in aggregate demand. So hence, as a result, that then influences the aggregate demand graph that we have here. Then with the monetary policy, you're looking at your interest rates. So interest rates are a key fundamental signatory or indicator when it comes to um, um, spending within an economy. So whenever interest rates are increased, it's going to be affecting consumption spending by households, because households are going to be finding it difficult to have access to credit, and credit creation process no longer takes place within an economy, and aggregate demand would then be affected if interest rates are high. And if interest rates are reduced, households also find it cheaper to have access to credit. They get access to various types of financing, month-to-month financing, vehicle financing, mortgage financing, and all of that. So all of that combined together would then have an effect on aggregate demand as well. We're going to be highlighting as well furthermore on that when we look at, I think, the Keynes theory, the monetary policy, um, um, the monetary schools of thoughts, the schools of thought, economic schools of thoughts, where we highlight more on the aggregate demand graph and the aggregate supply graph, and some of the elements in relation to spending within an economy, the types of spending, your autonomous spending, your income-induced spending as well, when you look at that. So that becomes imperatively important. So in terms of policy making, these policies are important because when an economy is on an expansionary drive, both on the fiscal elements and on the monetary elements, that creates a drive in terms of spending that is going to be taking place. If an economy is having an expansionary approach, the government is aggressively spending, the monetary policy has reduced interest rates to an extent that it becomes easy for firms and the households to have access to credit, you'd find out that aggregate demand begins to grow, and as it is growing, output is growing. So the intention there is to stimulate the economy. So you'd find out that when they refer to the expansionary policies, they refer to them as stimulus packages, because they stimulate the economy towards productivity, they stimulate the economy towards full employment of resources. So as a result of that, you'd find out that that creates an issue within the economy as well. And that becomes a drive when it comes to inflation. So expansionary policies also have an effect when it comes to the policies that are going to be influencing aggregate demand and inflation within that particular element. All right, then we have increased consumer confidence. Whenever consumer confidence is increased, you'd find out that it increases aggregate demand as well. Households begin to spend more, and investors also begin to invest more within that particular economy, because they believe that there is stability within this particular economy. So usually stability comes from the political side as well as the monetary side itself. So whenever there's confidence within a particular economy, you'd find out that that creates elements when it comes to increased consumer confidence. Then we have rising exports. So whenever exports are rising, this one is a bit on the borderline. Whenever exports are rising, you'd find out that, that increases aggregate demand as a result of the demand that is happening from the external economy to the local economy. And that in as much as it's increasing, it also has an effect on the aggregate demand as well, because of the demand that is taking place. But however, this one is, like I said, on the borderline, because you would want as much exports as you can get within a particular economy in such a way that would then influence the economy. Imports as well. At some point, if the economy is import related, you'd find out that to a greater extent that importation becomes a an Achilles heel for the economy, because issues relating to increases in prices in another countries becomes increases in prices in the local economy, because whenever you're importing from another country, if prices of raw materials increase in another country, it means that you're going to be having the net effect of that imported into your local economy. So you'd find out that also results in an increase in inflation to a greater degree. So with demand pull inflation, in a nutshell, we can just simply say it's too much money chasing too few goods. As a result, you'd find out that aggregate demand would then begin to increase to an extent where aggregate supply can no longer adjust to the increases in the prices as a result of that. So that is what we can talk about in relation to the first cause, which you're referring to as the first cause, which is your demand pull inflation graph. Then secondly, we have what we refer to as the cost push inflation. So with cost push inflation, this is the most dangerous type of inflation if it is to occur in any economy, because it's of its nature when it comes to the difficulties when it comes to managing cost push inflation. So cost push inflation usually occurs when there's an increase in the costs of production, forcing producers to raise prices in order to maintain profit margins. So some of you probably that are into business, you understand that when the price of raw materials increase, in order for you to take that increase as a loss, you would rather push it back to the consumers by increasing your prices as a result of that. So hence, as a result, that's what most firms do. Most firms are profit-oriented. And due to that profit orientation, whenever they face any increases or any threats to their profits, they react to that by increasing their prices. So hence, as a result, you find out that whenever the cost of production increase, you find out that there's an increase in the prices that takes place. So from there, you'd realize that whenever cost of production increase, it comes from a wide variety of places as a result of that. So the causes of the increases in the cost of production can be from a geopolitical perspective when there's war. I'm sure by now we are no longer new to the word of war. We are now used to it, and we are actually anxiety sometimes kicks in when some of these events takes place. Some of these superpowers begin to flex their muscles when you're looking at it from a geopolitical perspective, because it has an impact as well on the economic side, regardless of where you are on the continent or on the globe. So whether you are directly involved or you're indirectly involved, you find out that whenever war takes place, it affects the rest of the economies as well, especially if they are key areas within the globe that are into war. So the geopolitics, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war 2022, where there was a sudden spike in oil and gas prices, and the major effects of that was felt mainly in Europe, where the gas prices began to increase. Here in Africa, we felt it with the increase in the price of bread. I don't know to what extent was that genuine, because I didn't understand the connection of why Russia and Ukraine were fighting would then lead to an increase in the price of bread. However, later explanations came in that Ukraine was a major supplier of wheat in the global market, and hence as a result, that war then affected in the increases in the cost of wheat, etc. So you find out that some of these would become speculation from the sides of producers, where whenever some of these events take place, they would take advantage of that and just increase prices simply because of that. So you find out that the sentiment sensitivity in relation to some of these news breakouts is very high when it comes to the markets as well. So these wars, the Russia-Ukraine war, recently we've been having a 12-day war between Israel and Iran, with Iran threatening to disrupt some of the key supply chains that are used for global trade, which is referred to as the Strait of Hormuz, which there was a significant threat when it comes to international trade is to take place, because it is used when it comes to oil supplies, etc., across the region. The Gulf states, etc., uses that channel to supply oil. So hence, as a result, whether we liked it or not, we're going to be first with the increases in the price of fuel as a result of that. Then we have blockages in blockades or blockages in the strategic trade routes. The Suez Canal is one of them. We talked about the Strait of Hormuz. And in that, it creates what we refer to as a leftward shift in the aggregate supply graph, as you see from the green line that we have here, indicating an initial graph that is there before any of these events take place. And after the events take place, you'd have a leftward shift in the aggregate supply graph, where you now have a red graph indicating a leftward shift in the aggregate supply graph, as indicated by the graph that we have there. And also, one of the key contributors to that is the rising wage prices. So wage rates are a key production cost contributor when you are employing. One of the key costs that you're going to be faced with is your wages. And obviously, when there is an increase in the wages, that is going to increase your cost of production. The government mandates a minimum wage that you're not supposed to be paying below a certain threshold. And you are then supposed to be increasing your prices in order to meet the government threshold that it is placed in terms of the minimum wage. And then, as a result, creating cost push inflation as a result of that. So this is also sensitive, because when the capitalists or the producers look at what is happening, especially with AI and robotics, automation, they would rather use AI, they would rather use automation in their production value lines in order to cut back on the wages. And that would then create issues relating to unemployment as well. So this is also something to watch, especially in the coming few years as well. Currently, it's affecting some sectors as well. Then increase in the cost of raw materials. So cost of raw materials are an important contributor to the cost of production. So whenever cost of raw materials increase, so cost of raw materials an increase due to, we talked about geopolitics, sanctions being imposed on other countries as well, that can increase the cost of raw materials, increases maybe in the difficulties in transporting, or even the shortages of certain raw materials, for instance, semiconductors that are currently being used in the manufacturing of these computers that are used in AI and data centers. So you find out that becomes key when it comes to that. So rare earth minerals and all of that becomes key as a result of that. So whenever there is an increase in the cost of raw materials, it's likely to result in an increase in the cost push of inflation. So costs of raw materials can also increase as a result of tariffs. Remember, Trump was also imposing tariffs, and there's been a bloodbath within the stock markets and the financial markets as a result of that, because of the threat that it poses. So countries that import raw materials, we talked about semiconductors. We understand America is a mainly tech-based economy, where some of these tech firms like your NVIDIA, etc., that are into computer chip manufacturing, etc., were faced with a retaliatory tariff as a result of that. And some of these tariffs would then result in increases in their manufacturing costs. So some of the companies had projected losses exceeding 5 billion, etc., exceeding hundreds of billions of dollars as a result of that. So as a result of that, you'd find out that increase inflation. Someone is asking, do sanctions increase inflation? All right. So currently, it's a hot topic in South Africa because of the threat that America has been putting on South Africa. So some of the effects that it has, it can be a direct effect or it can be an indirect effect, an unintended consequence as a result of other key players within an economy. Let me talk about the direct effect of how sanctions can affect prices. We talked about Russia and Ukraine. So I understand that when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was immediately sanctioned by the European Union, by the United States, as a result of that. So that means that when some of the sanctions in place, They come in as a result of trade embargoes, trade bans, etc. Funds cannot be wired across um, uh, the borders getting into Russia or from Russia, either way. So hence as a result, you find out that it depends with the way the sanctions are structured. So if they're structured in such a way that it will then affect the supply of a key raw material, for instance, we talked about gas, we talked about oil as well. So we found out that as a result of that, when sanctions are imposed on Russia, you'd have inflation taking place in Russia itself, and you'd also have inflation taking place on economies that were dependent on Russian gas. You'd find out that the price of gas, the price of energy in Europe, in the instance of the imposition of the sanctions, began to swell up, began to increase as a result of that. So before they could adjust their supply chains to change from this supplier, from this Russian supplier to other suppliers, that would affect the European Union as well. In particular, Germany was also affected because it was importing gas from Russia. And within the Russian economy itself, obviously, since they are the ones that are being targeted, obviously that resulted in increases in prices where you had the Russian ruble also collapsing as a result of that. So we found out that that creates local inflation within that particular economy as well. So that creates inflation. So within South African context, I would pair it with, of course, it's different with what happened in Zimbabwe, where when sanctions was imposed in Zimbabwe, they referred to as targeted sanctions, targeted on certain politicians. But you found out that some of these politicians have corporations, own corporations that are major traders in within a particular economy. And as a result of that, you'd find out that that would then cripple the whole of the economy. And some of them would become blanket sanctions to the rest of the economy and affecting the rest of the economy in the process. Then we have high import prices. So high import prices can also affect whenever the exchange rate is depreciating, the South African rand is losing. It means you need more of the South African rand to purchase goods that are coming from other countries as a result of that. Then we have increases in taxes and regulatory costs. So taxation can also result in cost-push inflation. So I mentioned the issue that this is the most dangerous type of inflation if it is to occur because of its nature and how difficult it is to manage. Let me just get back to the study guide. Okay, so it's the same graph. So let me just explain on that why cost-push inflation is dangerous. So with comparing it to demand pull inflation, when it comes to demand pull inflation, it's easy to manage demand pull inflation because you can use these policies, you can reverse these policies, that is your expansionary policy and your monetary policy, in order to control demand pull inflation. If you were expanding the economy through expansionary fiscal policies, you can simply use contractionary policies to cause prices to go down. So contractionary policies from a monetary perspective would be increases in interest rates. So when you increase interest rates, it means that aggregate demand is going to contract as a result of that. When you then reduce government spending, it means that also it's going to be reducing the pressure when it comes to inflation within that particular economy. So that becomes easy from a demand pull perspective. Now, if you want to apply that same rule, cost push, let's take, for instance, contracting the monetary policy, that is reducing interest rates. So if you try to increase interest rates, so increasing interest rates is the contractionary policy. So when you try to increase interest rates on a cost push environment, you are likely going to increase that. Why? Because already firms are faced with higher costs of production. So whenever you increase interest rates, it means that firms are likely going to have further cost of production increases as a result of that. And instead of having this graph moving from red to green, you'd find out that it will be moving in the opposite direction, that it will further move in the leftward direction. So let's use the graph that you have here with an arrow. So it shows the aggregate supply moving from AS1 to AS2, indicating that you are having a leftward shift in the aggregate supply graph. So when you introduce increases in interest rates, it's going to further exacerbate this aggregate supply leftward reduction as a result of that, and it's going to further increase the leftward shift of that particular graph. And as a result of that, you would have total income and production also moving to the left. So you'd find out that these elements would then become difficult to manage as a result of that. Even if you had to use contractionary fiscal policy, that is where you reduce government spending. So when you try to reduce government spending on it, the effect that it has is that you're likely going to you find out that some of the government spending is to deal with subsidies to these firms, and you're going to be reducing these subsidies that you're providing to these firms, and as a result, you would find out that that creates a leftward shift. And if you want to increase taxation in order to contract the economy, it's going to be worse because taxation are going to be seen as a cost by the firms, and firms are further going to be increasing the prices and reducing production as a result of that. So you find out that that becomes imperatively to this. So hence, as a result, you'd find out that that creates an issue in relation to cost-push inflation as a result of that. So there are other approaches that are used when it comes to inflation. So for instance, if you have cost-push inflation, in order to manage it, you would need to have what they refer to as an incomes policy. So an incomes policy is a situation where you encourage citizens within a particular nation to accept low wages for the time being, as inflationary adjustments take place over time. And you would encourage firms to reduce their prices and not to increase their prices as a result of that, from a moral perspective, in order to support the economy as well, in terms of the effect that it has on the economy. All right, so I see that we are running out of time. I want to get into the approaches of inflation, the conflict approach, the monetarist approach. I wanted to get also into the case studies that we have had in relation to inflation, some of the countries that have faced inflation in recent times, from Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Germany, as well as your Argentina, and how it had in relation to the consequences that it had on the economy, as well as its effects within a particular economy. But I see that we are almost out of time here. Let me try to open the the floor for questions before we look at one question that I have here that I'm going to introduce with inflation. Any questions relating to what we've just talked about, demand pull, cost push inflation? Someone say, I won't lie to you, I'm really lost, but I'll try to go through this unit again. My desire is that you don't get lost. My desire is that we get to find each other. So sometimes people get scared, especially when we introduce these particular graphs. Some people, it becomes intimidating, especially if you didn't meet them more regularly in your micro elements, or if you didn't go through the microeconomics and you just met macroeconomics at this particular stage. All right, so I don't know if you have any questions in relating to that. So I think from next week, we are going to start again from unit number 1, unit number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So try to cover each unit within each session in order to ensure that all of you are fully satisfied. Let me open the floor to hear from you. Any questions? All right, so let's just look at one question that I have here for you. Yes.
Will we be getting the slides that you just shared with us on WhatsApp?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I'll send them to James, and you are going to get the slides.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So today I have one question for you. I think this one should be easy. This is question number 20, which reads, this is from the same question paper that we're looking at. During demand pull inflation, the aggregate demand curve shifts dash, leading to dash. During demand pull inflation, the aggregate demand curve shifts dash, leading to dash. A, we have leftward comma, an increase in output and employment. B, rightward semicolon, an increase in prices and wages. C, rightward, an increase in prices. Then D, leftward, a decrease in the consumer spending and investments. So this is what we were just talking about in some moments ago. And we've also been looking at the graphs relating to that. Now there comes a question. Let's see. All right, I see answers are coming in. I see one person has answered. What do the rest of you think? What happens when demand pull inflation takes place? What happens to the aggregate demand? What does it lead to? All right, I see a variety of answers. All right, I see C, I see B. All right. So demand pull inflation, the aggregate demand shifts to C, rightward, and leading to an increase in prices. So this is correct. So this is exactly what we're looking at this particular graph, where you have aggregate demand shifting to the right. And as the aggregate demand is shifting to the right, prices are increasing. You see at the general price level moving from P1, P2, the total production from Y1 to Y2. So that is correct. Rightward shift leading to increases in prices. That is very much correct. All right, so I've been seeing some of the feedback that is coming from you. Some of you were not hearing anything. I hope we are going to be hearing each other when it comes to the next sessions. I'll try to slow down my pace so that it accommodates you. Whenever you're not understanding, you feel free to ask a question, and we'll be delving much more deep into making sure that you understand. And at the end of each session, you also get the material that would have used. You also get the recording to also go through the recording again, and also the questions to strengthen your understanding of a particular topic within each topic is concerned. So from next week, we're going to start again from unit number 1, where we are going to look at what we looked at now from a deeper perspective, getting into all of the elements that we didn't look at from unit 1 and unit 2 as well, in relation to the introduction and measuring the performance of an economy. So it becomes important. So the whole economics subject centers around these macroeconomic objectives, macroeconomics. So when you understand these macroeconomic objectives and how they link to the rest of the chapters, all of the elements would just then fall into play because they dovetail into each other. And as a result of that, you'd find the links between them, and it becomes easy to understand all of these elements. So I'll try to slow down my pace so that you guys can fully understand which is the goal. But I think for today, let's call it a day. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for attending. Let's meet again next week. Goodbye.